Hi. Well, there's no escape now. I just would like to begin by saying that normally architects talk about the aesthetics of their work and their beauty, and usually themselves. And in this case, I'm just talking about an attitude and generally how I got from point A to point B, but almost all the work I'm showing has very little to do with me. I'm just sort of a manager of large Renaissance groups of people as opposed to a Renaissance man. So that being said, I just want to start by talking about how I came to be an architect, and it's of course started at school. And when I started at the University of Waterloo, it was in the midst of what was a raging, and probably the last raging battle of architecture between two schools, one defined by the modernists, which had kind of carried the day from the early 30s to when I started in the 70s, and that they were defined as the guys who were anti-history, machine addicted, into very clean lines, clean plans, and it was, a cultural revolution that removed the notion of ideation and replaced it, or illustration, replaced it by abstraction, and of course it went through art and music and other of the arts, and it was defined as a movement that was going to fix the cities of the pre-World War and post-World War I, and would have a very serious social agenda for housing, people, and commerce, and sort of densification of the city, but it was primarily urban focused. Of course, it had some exuberance to it that was maybe going a little far. This is Corbusier's plan for Paris, just across from the Louvre, and of course you can see it's the Plan Voisin. It proposed destroying the majority of downtown Paris and replacing it with huge mega blocks of housing for the people, which he felt was required to deal with the kind of densification of the city. And that kind of vision moves on to a point where people become profoundly unhappy with the kind of visual aspect of the city and how it's formed. And so when I started in school, this was beginning to be replaced by, and this is the Dawn, the sculpture called Dawn, that at the Mies van der Rohe Barcelona Pavilion, which might be more referred to as Twilight now, and was being replaced by a kind of movement called postmodernism that went to reconnect with history, reconnect with the past, and to try and find sort of an architecture that would be more in keeping with what people's kind of aesthetics desires were, and that would have less abstraction and more connection to the body and so on. So this was the kind of signature image of that. It was called the primitive hut. And it led to a kind of discussion of classicism, and the plans became more ornate, more symmetrical, and so on. But of course, as you can see here, the plans stop having much to do with actual content, and it quickly devolves into a form of formalism. And in particular, it replaces the agenda of kind of urban concepts where the form follows function, and now it becomes more of a kind of suburban idea, more elitist. It dovetails quite well with the neocons coming into government in the United States, Ronald Reagan or Brian Mulroney here, and it becomes very focused on the single-family house, and generates a series of kind of postmodernist uglinesses such as this one, and some kind of horrors in the cities that are much more about form as opposed to actually solving a social agenda. But fortunately, there was a kind of savior that comes along and starts dovetailing with all of this, and that is, of course, the sustainability movement, which really gets its beginning in some ways with this classic book by Rachel Carson in 1962. And then I think that the images from the moon, of course, in the late 60s really cement this idea that the world is finite and that we are the caretakers of that world, and we have to start looking at it in a way that's much more kind of holistic. Unfortunately, for me, where I saw this going is I started taking courses, and the first one was based around this book by Edward Masria. It was a very important book. It was all about solar energy and locating your architecture in a place, and its organization and trying to use passive energy as opposed to active energy. And it studied quite extensively Hopi Indian communities in the United States, which of course ended up being translated directly into a style, and we all kind of know some of these buildings where Adobe suddenly became symptomatic with sustainability, and you started seeing Adobe structures in the LoRa, which made no sense whatsoever. And again, it was all focused on the kind of single-family dwelling, and then it merges with the anti-war movement, the back-to-the-earth movement, the kind of anti-established movement, and we start to see these kind of freak shows that appear as kind of sustainabilities. But nonetheless, it was still fundamentally a kind of ex-urban or agrarian concept of sustainability, and as we move forward, it dovetails quite nicely with the North American myths of the pioneer in the landscape, and to where it's come now. This is a brand new house, which is really, in some ways, it's a very beautiful thing, but of course it's for the 1%, and it doesn't reflect the situation in the rest of the 99% of the world where basically people can't afford these things. But it's a great laboratory for things like, cross ventilation and solar panels and so on and so forth. But it is, in some ways, a very inadequate model. So for me, when I was going to architecture school, I was quite fascinated by large structures, and probably has something to do with my ego, but that I was fascinated with what cities were becoming. And in particular, when you sort of read these statistics now, where 70% of all the people on Earth will be living in urban areas by 2050, which is an extraordinary thing, because it's no longer about being a pioneer. It's actually the opposite. People are moving away from being pioneers and moving into the cities. And by 2050, we should have another 2 billion people on the planet, which is an extraordinary thing. We just passed 7 billion this year. We've doubled, in my lifetime, the population of the planet. And so the issue of cities is really paramount. So we have to kind of look at a different paradigm. So for me, the kind of Rachel Carson image of the kind of beautiful Earth is in fact now replaced by a very interconnected Earth and a kind of idea that we are moving energy around the Earth. And in some ways, the more kind of apt future that we can see is something like Star Wars, the Coruscant, which is where the Emperor lived in Star Wars, where everything's digital and fully interconnected. And I think we actually are, to a large degree, there now. And so for me, the kind of great pieces of architecture that worked with that were these kind of supervisions of people like Buckminster Fuller. This is the United States Pavilion at the Montreal Expo, which is now, ironically, a kind of environmentalist museum. And it's a beautiful structure that kind of created this idea that we should be looking at creating mega environments that then cities and housing would fit into. It's, of course, a technical fix which has the potential for horror. This was an idea from Manhattan that Buckminster Fuller had, which was kind of coating the city with a bubble to get out of the problems of pollution so that you can continue polluting all around it, but you would still have this great environment inside your bubble, which is somewhat medieval and characteristic, but nonetheless it was a kind of, it had sort of some real power to it, and that it wasn't retreating to the countryside. It was sort of seeing an idea that we could do something dramatic with the city, and that the city was the locus of imagination and an active life, and was worthy of consideration and community. This is a drawing by Archigram, which again is all about a kind of future, very high-tech mega city that then gets combined with other ideas they had about the city as machine, and that we'd actually have kind of, you could just get on your machine city and go somewhere else out to the mountains if you wanted to see the countryside. Again, totally fanciful, but the idea of, it got to certain ideas about the city as a very kind of living organism and living in connected systems, which is very important to me, to my work, and I think that is the kind of paradigm that we need to continue working towards. And it had its kind of ultimate expression in the very early work of Richard Rogers, where you can see a kind of celebration of the machine, but combined with sort of some natural landscapes that work inside those structures. So what does that mean for kind of what we do now? And to me, the idea of the city is worthy of combining now, using it as a kind of the poster child for sustainability, the poster child for integration of systems, and to move away from the idea of the kind of pioneer out in the landscape in their kind of single family dwelling with solar panels on their roof. And this is going to require kind of massive amounts of people organizing themselves and working through every step of the way to look at methods of improving the quality of life in the city, but also improving the character of those systems so that they use less energy and pollute less and have smaller footprints. So this is just a quote from the net zero community, which just basically says that what we should be looking to do is maximize the performance of all of our buildings, including existing buildings, but at the same time renewing the systems that feed them so that they are more interconnected and have more less impact on the environment. This is a poster child for how not to do it, which is the tallest building in the world now, the Burj Dubai, by any measure. It's the tallest tower, it's the tallest habitable building, etc. But it is fully fed by a line of trucks that remove the poo from this building because it has no sewer system connected up to it. That's some 3 kilometers long. It sometimes takes 2 days to empty these trucks into a kind of cesspit on the outside of town. They're busy trying to build the infrastructure to support it, but this to me is an act of madness because it means you haven't even thought at all about your infrastructure while you're building this monster. And this is the characteristic of Dubai, and it's a city in the desert that is consuming massive amounts of energy, but at the same time it really gives nothing back. As opposed to this project in Toronto, which starts with trying to improve the quality of the drinking water in Toronto. It proposes putting, this is the first thing I worked on at this firm that I'm now a member of, where the Metro Toronto Convention Centre is below grade. We built into it these cisterns and a pumping station that eventually gets hooked up to 7-kilometer-long pipes that go into the deep of Lake Ontario, drawing water into an existing facility, and then a brand new facility below grade, which is full of what are referred to as plate exchangers, to just remove between 2 to 4 degrees off of the temperature of this water, which comes in at about 39 degrees, and then with that generate 40,000 tons of cooling that then gets recirculated into the downtown core of Toronto and is an extensive network that you can see that goes all the way up to Queen's Park and feeds all of these buildings in downtown Toronto, and they're just about to do a few things to double that capacity. So not only are you improving the water in the city, you're feeding mega buildings, which house it's the kind of center of the finance of the country, and you're doing things like this project that is just finished. It's the RBC building. Is a LEED Gold project. It uses approximately 45% less energy than it would typically. And again, you're almost getting it for free because the energy is coming from a system that's already required to improve the kind of quality of life in the city. It's the kind of level of integration that's required for cities as we move forward. And then on top of that, we have to start kind of reinvigorating our existing building stock. This is a classic building in downtown Toronto. It's the Toronto Dominion Centre by Mies van der Rohe, and my firm reclad this thing, but of course the object is to make it look like nothing's happened. When it was built, nobody cared about energy. It was so cheap, but if you can look at this system, that is single glazing. That's the inside on this side, and on the outside it's basically a rail. So it's like a radiator. It's like you have a piece of cellophane between you and the exterior. So of course it's just awe-inspiringly inefficient. The cold just comes in. If you're sitting by the window, it has frost on the window, etc. So the object here was to transform the building, but leaving it completely intact. So we did a pile of studies to remove the glass, change it into a high-performance glazing system, complete with aluminum extrusions, pump insulation into that cap. It doesn't look like anything's changed, but it allowed us to remove in red a full heater system there, which gave us an extra 20 inches around the perimeter of the structure, and put a high-efficiency chilled beam system up into the ceiling, and again reducing the energy loads on what is arguably a terrible building from a sustainability perspective, but reducing the energy load by 30%, and increasing rentable area without building anything. which is kind of an extraordinary effect. And now this building is hooked up to the district heat cooling system that I showed you before. So you're getting this win-win where you're actually improving the capacity and improving its effect, and it's a 50-year-old building. Plus, we added some green roofs to the existing banking pavilion below. Really, in some ways, just for entertainment. Anyhow, and then so just to cap this off with a kind of conversation about cities, it's very important, is that in North America we have this idea of cities where we just kind of replace everything. As opposed to in Europe, and this is just showing classical downtown Rome, where you can see there's like 5 layers of buildings, and these kind of massive structures have been layered on top of each other over the centuries. And now, of course, it has it's moved into the modern world, and you can see over in the corner here, this is a theater called the Teatro de Marcellus. During the Renaissance, it became fully occupied within its kind of structure. The structure remains to this day, and on the right, that's a plan of it. It's a structure that's been so useful that it's been inhabited by fish markets, by the poor on its kind of outskirts, and then on the interior, there it is in the model form, and there it is today, the aerial. The interior, it's turned into a hill town, and its seats, and the Barbarinis have a palace built into it overlooking the Tiber. So it's a piece of infrastructure that starts as a building and then slowly over time becomes a kind of modified piece. Likewise, this is a project in downtown Toronto. It's the first Canadian place with this massive structure. It's 2 million square feet. It is probably legitimately one of the centers of finance in the world. And it was built in 1976. And a few years ago, the marble started falling off of it. As you can see here, all the marble's curved. So it started popping off in the wind, which, as you can imagine, is a slight liability issue. So we reclad the building and brought it into the 21st century by removing all of this material, replacing it with a very sophisticated glazed system. And what's intriguing to me, and going back to my days of archigram, is that we as architects very seldomly get to do these things, but we developed a machine system around the outside, which is essentially a 3-story factory that bolts onto the outside of the building, and we remove the existing marble and replace it with brand new insulation and improved windows and glazing. And that system just slowly moved down the building, and as we moved forward with it, it became more and more rationalized to the point where we were starting to replace glass at the rate of, one panel every 8 minutes. And really, there was this kind of life that went on up there in the building that was very much like those kind of archigram images, where you can see that as we go, the building, it's like someone taking off their dress in reverse, and slowly kind of brand new aspect of this building. And at the end of the day, the building's now LEED Gold. We replaced all the mechanical systems. It too is saving something like 40% of its energy. It's reusing heat that's coming out of the bathroom to run hot water tanks for domestic hot water, et cetera, et cetera. And just to conclude, one of the kind of aspects of the sustainability movement that's about the single-family home is this notion that we somehow everything has to be local, and we have to look at everything sort of in its spot. And I'm not sure that when it comes to things like the Burj Dubai with sewage and so on, that that's actually a good idea, that we have to look at systems that are quite expansive. And I think we actually have to have the guts to look at much, much larger systems in this context. And just as a bit of an anecdote, this is an image, one of those classic images of internet use in the world. And if you imagine this TED Talk and our day-to-day, that people around the world will be looking at it, literally around the world. We did a Microsoft headquarters in Shanghai, and the 5th floor, in any Microsoft building, they take 20% and just devote it to servers. They have no idea what it's for. It just makes it a terrible nightmare in terms of mechanical systems for cooling and so on, because they're very hot. Shanghai actually gets quite cold for 2 months of the year. we managed to take the heat from those servers and pump it back into the building for those 2 months of the year. So there's no heating system, it's just all coming off the computers. So that effectively when you're searching your TED Talk or searching something on Bing, for those 2 months of the year, you're heating somebody in Shanghai. And to me, that's a fully integrated system, and that's the way the world is going, is to this kind of denser and denser fabric, and to create more sustainability, to become more communal, to put 9 billion people on the world, and so that we can all live together in a kind of positive and creative manner. And I just want to finish that this will require a bit of effort on all of our parts, but we found this stone on the 40th floor of First Canadian Place, and somebody took the time to carve it in there, and this is my terrible Latin translation, but it's this stone from Italy, is obtained from the patrician father A.B. Ottoni, and is drenched with sweat and tears. And that's city building, and that's the type of attitude we have to take towards these kind of large integrated systems. And it's a very positive potential. Thank you.